When was the last time that you were blown away by a live show where you walked out completely energized with your adrenaline going, feeling like your faith in music and specifically live music was restored? Well, that just happened to me the other night when I went to see the Dandy Warhols. I was so impressed and moved by this show that afterwards it had me wondering, are the Dandy Warhols the last great rock band left? I'm Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist, and this is FeedbackDef. Okay, so you know what to do if you like what I'm laying down. I'd love it if you hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons, etc., and weigh in the comments. You can also support the channel by buying me a coffee, and also there's a link in the description below, and also subscribing to my Substack, becoming a paid subscriber. All right, the Dandy Warhols are a rock quartet formed in Portland, Oregon in 1994. They are best known for their song Bohemian Like You, which was used in a Vodafone commercial. However, I feel like the songs that are most, left a stamp would be Not If You Were the Last Junkie on Earth and We Used to Be Friends. However, Bohemian Like You is much more widely known. So they debut in 1995 with an album called Dandies Rule OK. Dandies Rule OK, that's the correct pronunciation. And that is a combination of garage rock, psychedelia, rock and roll, and shoegaze. So if you like those styles, if you are drawn to those kinds of aesthetics, you would be drawn to the Dandy Warhols. However, they put a really fresh twist on those styles that they touch. They would later move into like synth pop, like dance electro, even proggy kind of stuff, and more experimental avenues as well. So FYI, this video is mainly about the show and the first part of the band's catalog. I'm going to do a second part where I talk about the remainder of the catalog. So when I saw them the other night, frontman and band leader and principal songwriter Courtney Taylor says to the crowd, yeah, do you remember grunge and rock rap? Because it is the 30th anniversary of their first album. He said, when we started, people threw shit at us, or we got shit thrown at us. Which I thought was very strange because I thought there was plenty of room in that decade for what they were doing. In fact, I consider their sophomore album, The Dandy Warhols Come Down, to be one of the defining records of the 90s. So if you're the kind of fan who gravitates to music for like the surface style of it, and this is not to disparage, whatever you're into, let your flag fly, right? But if you say like garage and psychedelia and you're really, really drawn to that, you love the whole sort of world that's created by dressing like that, by looking like that, by signaling to the world that that's your thing, I could see you liking the Dandy Warhols. I never took them just on that level. I never pegged them as a band that like, hey, Quentin Tarantino would put this band in his new movie. Like people who really like ultra stylized stuff. Because I thought they not only put a really fresh twist on the styles that they came out with first, that combination of styles I described. Not only did they do it with a lot of character and verve and cleverness, but there are certain bands that cut past whatever it is they're wearing on their sleeves or on their front-facing like presentation, and they get to the heart of what music is. And when I heard the Dandy Warhols Come Down, it really, really grabbed me. And like a lot of things I get into, I couldn't have cared less about joining the tribe, or even not so much joining the tribe, but pursuing things that on the face of it appear to sound this way. Like I didn't go, oh, I love 13th Floor Elevators, and I love shoegaze this, and I love garage psychedelia this, and that's my that's my shit kind of. And so then the next logical step is the Dandy Warhols. I wasn't partisan or parochial about it, just like a lot of stuff. Like when I first got into Alice Cooper and really, really, really got into Alice Cooper, I didn't know anything about glam, Detroit, that whole scene, and still really don't, because that's not, the music is connecting with me and speaking to me on a level beyond what it looks like. It's interesting to me that they're also known for being like sort of the co-subjects in the documentary Dig from 2004 alongside the Brian Jonestown Massacre, because again, that's a band where the leader, Anton Newcomb, who once called me a cunt, by the way, and then he, I wrote back and he apologized, like, in the next email. It was pretty funny. And it was cool after that. But he is somebody who also presents as like, oh, I am one with this aesthetic. This aesthetic is me. My art is to speak the language of this aesthetic, right? And that film juxtaposed the Brian Jonestown Massacre as like this like twisted genius with the Dandy Warhols. And I don't think that's certainly not like the full impression. Now, I will also say, I think this band has always tried to get us to think, or at least this is my impression, that they have more style over substance. I feel like they are pretend posers, actually. Again, I didn't see them that way because I got into their second record and I was like, whoa. But certain things they've said, this sort of self-deprecating attitude, this real kind of self-consciously humorous, like we're taking the piss out of ourselves, we're not taking ourselves too seriously approach, really gave me the impression that they're like, oh yeah, we're just knocking around sounds, and they do seem image conscious, right? Especially when they were younger and kind of trying to look in this way, in this kind of offbeat way, kind of beautiful, right? Courtney Taylor could have been a fashion model, as could have been Zia McCabe. They're keyboard / bassist / multi-instrumentalist. So you could have looked at them and said, oh yeah, this band has an image, they have a look. And then they would say things that were, like I said, self-deprecating, like they wanted to be seen as tongue-in-cheek. And look, their music has a lot of humor, so you can take it on that level. Something that I just remembered, when they put out their 2003 album, Welcome to the Monkey House, the press release, I remember getting it, was a mock interview that Courtney Taylor did with himself, and then he got mad and stormed out of the interview. And that, to this day, remains the most interesting press release I've ever gotten, right? There's a real wit here to this band. And there are certain moments in their catalog that are very, very, and I mean very bubbly and effervescent. They have a song named Every Day Should Be a Holiday. It's like if you like had that song on in your car with like open road and you're on the highway and you got the windows open and you're blaring this song and you don't feel like this incredible sense of like being alive, then I don't know what to tell you. I know not everybody agrees on stuff, but for me, that song, it's got this like, sort of post ZZ Top kind of synth beat, but done by a rock band. It just captures that feeling of, I'm so alive, the world is my oyster, and it's so exuberant. I could see that song being played at a festival with like 100,000 people just bouncing up and down. And it's interesting because there is a clip of them playing that song at Pink Pop in 2003, and they fucking do the song a cappella, which is like, what are you doing? Beautiful rendition, but it's like, come on. Why didn't you break into the actual song and get that crowd going? We're bombarded with these sort of shorthand thumbnail mimetic images of the 90s, as if, if you were to sum that decade up, it's Limp Bizkit and the crowd at Woodstock 99 destroying the place. There was the Dandies' chance to put their stamp on that, and they didn't take it. So there's a goofy tongue-in-cheekness to their whole vibe. Like the presence that they cast is like people showing up at a party and being able to laugh at themselves and to play with this idea of stardom and leaving their mark. It's hard to put my finger on like concrete reasons why I get that impression, but the more you spend time with them, I think you'll sort of cotton on to what I'm talking about. So for argument's sake, let's say I'm right in my impression, I don't know whether that wasn't some kind of armor, right? Whether they weren't actually vying and trying to be impactful and resonate with the zeitgeist somehow, and they were kind of a little maybe like, we're too cool for that. I don't know. But what I do know is that the cleverness can kind of obscure the depth of the music in a way. It makes it initially charming, and it's like, hey, it's very self-effacing and you can relate to it right off the bat. But there's a lot more there. There's definitely humor, there's definitely cleverness, there's definitely tongue-in-cheek, there's definitely self-deprecation, and kind of like thumbing their nose at culture. It's not quite ironic, but a little bit of kind of like a sneer, but with a smile. I guess a smiling sneer is the best way to describe their attitude. But then there are also there's realness in it too. So I first heard these guys in 1997 when there was a then new video on MTV for a song that I mentioned named Not If You Were the Last Junkie on Earth. And then I think I saw the CD in a used CD store and bought it and was instantly pulled in. And I think because the album is so approachable, it's easy to overlook and not put all this weight on it and say, oh, this is one of the most important records of the decade. But I think it is. I don't know about important, but it's a highlight, and it defines the 90s in a way that I really like, which is why I thought it was strange that Courtney Taylor said that at the show, as if they were somehow outcasts from that decade. I think their sensibility fit right in with a lot of other really interesting artists who had their own personalities in their sound. They could have been right there in a Lollapalooza. And the one thing that really grabbed me, or that I almost 30 years later, walk away from that album with and from the early part of their catalog, is Courtney Taylor has such a distinctive approach to vocal harmonies. The song I mentioned, Every Day Should Be a Holiday, it's okay, so anytime, oh boy, that's harsh. Anytime, and one of the pitches is going, while the other vocal line goes, anytime. And together, it's this wonderful, almost like a choral arrangement, like a choir. And there's a phasing effect going on. And like I said, it's bubbly, like that harmony just goes straight to the upper part of your brain, champagne bubbles or something. And it's just really, really, really beautiful. And if you sit with their catalog, you'll hear what I'm talking about. There's another song they have named Nietzsche off of 13 Tales from Urban Bohemia. So that song has a main vocal line, very similar. So one of the vocal lines is keeping the same pitch and the other one is kind of doing this thing around it. So it's let me try again. Singing to the chicks and the flies in this room. I want a God who stays dead, not plays dead. Even I can play dead. I mean, it's fuck! That is so... It's airy and sublime and amazing. Now, there are clips from those periods, from when both of those songs were out. There's a clip from Australian TV of the band playing Every Day Should Be a Holiday, which I think is completely flimsy. The band seems like it can barely hold together. It's okay, this is a band... I had never seen that clip till today, but if I were to have seen that live, I would have been this is a band that really knows how to use the studio and can apply itself in the studio, but has a really difficult time recreating the essence of its material. Not that they don't actually have something legit that the studio is correcting for, but that they just really are adept in the studio. Then there's another clip of them doing it in 2003. There's a KEXP clip from 2013, I believe it is. There's a performance of Nietzsche from 2013 from somewhere else, somewhere in Portland, like a TV broadcast studio or something. And I don't know what's happened in the last 10 years or so to this band, but what I saw the other night, The band I saw the other night wipes the floor with the band in those clips. I was expecting a show like a good show. I was expecting them to be good. I was expecting something that I would enjoy a lot. I was not expecting to have my mind blown by this band and think like, God damn, like this is the ideal of what a band is as a full organism. And I want to clarify, in the thumbnail it says genius. I can see people who like really challenging music, complicated music, like fucking Zappa or Prague, Kim Crimson, Robert Fripp, or, Duke Ellington or Mozart or whatever, being like genius. This sort of jangle indie-ish sort of pop rock, garage band, get the fuck out of here. What I mean by genius is being able to tap into, for lack of a better word, the soul of what a band is, where it becomes its own living thing that has a source of energy that is beyond what any one of the people in it could do on their own. And that was very much in evidence at this show. I mean, it was like a fucking tidal wave, like of like realness and power. There's so much life in this band now. They started the show playing 2 songs from their debut and then explained, we just celebrated the 30th anniversary of our debut, so we're going to do 2 more songs from that. There were several songs from the 97 album. There were a handful from Bohemia, and then a handful from Welcome to the Monkey House, right? So that's their first 4 records, which I would make a case that's, they're all classics in their own way. And the songs are really, really vital still. And it's not just on the strength of the material, but like they looked invested. They looked not like people who are just trotting out the fucking, nostalgia thing because they feel their audience wants that, right? They were really, really, really into it. Like they inhabit these songs. They live in these songs in a way. It's like, wow, man. So I never thought of this band as shallow, but I really did not have any idea of just how not shallow and just how capable of a band they are until the other night. There was one moment where I watched their drummer, Brent DeBoer, who, by the way, puts his own twist on those harmonies live. It's a little different than the records. And he really brings something, a character. But he was walking to the drum set and he had a Dead Moon shirt on for that band, Dead Moon. I had this thought, what if these guys are like more about like coming off like a band and they have these like weird purity ethics, like the drums have to be really simple and things like that. And they're more into following those sort of aesthetic codes than they are really bringing it. And then they started playing. And yes, Brent DeBoer is a very pared down, very stripped down drummer. But he has this incredible bounce to what he does. Like all of them together, the groove they lock into, especially with him and when Zia McCabe is playing maraca or shaker or tambourine. Like I look in the video clips that I've mentioned and, she essentially looks like a non-musician in those clips, like somebody there to just kind of shake a tambourine. But when you watch the band live, let's set aside for a second her really engrossing keyboard work and her bass playing. Let's set that aside for a second, right? But on certain tunes, she's just like doing a shaker, doing some light backing vocals, not a lot, and then kind of swaying to the music. But that shaker or tambourine, that sort of, doubling of the rhythm, which you hear on some of the records, but it's not quite as pronounced. When you watch them do it, and it's like, ba, boom, ba, boom, ba. It's like, and then watching her sway, she's almost like a channel for it's groove, but it's like, I'm trying to find another word for it, for the cadence that makes them unmistakable. It's unique to this band. And I will say all of the, like each person in the band is completely indispensable to the whole. So I mentioned Brent, I mentioned Zia. Courtney Taylor is obviously the main songwriter, and he does a lot of the main sort of rhythm parts. I noticed even in his between song noodling, like he would do these short little interludes that were almost like jazzy or just like kind of like a guitar atmosphere. Even that had substance to it. Even that made my ear go, right? It wasn't like tossed off. It was very intentional and really, really ear-pleasing to listen to. They have a song, so my other of my 3 favorite songs by them is called You Come In Burned. It's the last tune on Welcome to the Monkey House. And that starts with like a trailing, echoey, reverbed out guitar. There was a lot of that between the songs at this show. And then last but not least, somebody who's playing, I didn't get the full magnitude of until watching him. Peter Holmstrom is like this like mushroom cloud explosion happening on his side of the stage, just huge swirls of sound and texture just engulfing the music in this really, and permeating it in this really, really gorgeous, impressive way. It reminds me a lot of what I feel the role that Dave Navarro serves in Jane's Addiction, right? What he brings to the table there. Not that Peter Holmstrom is like Dave Navarro, but in terms of using the guitar to, I don't know, turn a fucking song into a landscape painting or into some sort of extrasensory experience or something that transcends the senses. Like that's what he is doing to the music. And again, the way they all lock in. It was really, really funny because I went with my friend Jay. Shout out to Jay who follows the channel. Is a big supporter of what we're doing here. And we stood apart because I like to go to shows. I like to stand by myself. There was a moment we both had where we were just like, we were each like admiring what each of them was doing. And Peter Holmstrom, his tech, hands him a 12 string. And each of us independently was like, oh, wow, what is he going to do on the 12 string? And there was like totally straight. There wasn't anything. Like, you couldn't even tell it was a 12 string because I was like, oh, fuck, is he going to do like a Jimmy Page kind of thing? I don't know, That was really funny. And Jay also said the same thing. We were comparing notes. We were like, wow, that show afterwards. I was in a really relaxed mood because Jay fed me ribs. It was Mother's Day when they played. I had like the most fulfilling, perfect day. And I was in a super relaxed mood. It's Sunday. I've just eaten ribs, and my friend who's at the show with me has like grilled for his mom. And so I'm like fed. I'm happy. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to watch this show the same way I might like sip some cognac, even though I don't drink. But that kind of vibe. Boom. As soon as they start playing, I could not help but move. They're so invigorating to watch. It was such a joyful, freeing kind of like I just had to dance to it. And you can watch this band as somebody who makes music or is involved in making music in any way, or somebody who's really pays attention to how, the process and the composition, the sort of bricklaying of music. But then you can watch them just like do this, and you almost have to do both in a way, or you like it speaks to your hips. And like I said about Zia McCabe swaying, she's like the lightning rod for like, she's like receiving that and then sending that out into the audience in a way, or even to the rest of the band in a way. Again, setting aside all the instrumental stuff she's actually doing, but the dancing that she does is also crucial, I would say, on a really important, like musical, like deep in the fucking cells of the music. Super important. And that was such an exhilarating feeling to just have the music do. It was almost involuntary for me, right? I had to move, and again, coming off a perfect day to then with this was like, wow. Another thing I would say that really struck me, this band can, like what they were doing and the way they filled the room could work in like a small space, or I could also see it working in a really big space, like in an arena. Jay, my friend, afterwards said, man, they have such an authoritative way of playing, and yet they seem totally at ease. And I said, yes, there's something very commanding about their execution, and yet They seem like they're wearing their own sound, like a really comfortable broken in jacket or t-shirt that you've been wearing for like 30 years that's like mostly faded because you went to like an Aerosmith concert or something. But the material is so soft, right? Like they are at ease with the thing they've created. A lot of times you go see bands and you can sense that there's an ambivalence. Like, we created this thing, you like this thing, we are now dependent on serving you this thing for us to live, but we have all these other things we do, and it's like being in this like really fancy cage, but we're going to dance in this cage for you because we need it, not only your financial support, but we're now dependent on the approval. There was none of that hanging over this show, which really, really, really surprised me, because I only stuck with this band up until Welcome to the Monkey House. They have put out, so that's 4 records. They have put out 7 studio albums since then. A lost album, or like a version, the second album they wanted to do that they actually submitted when they were signed by Capitol, and then Capitol rejected that, and then they made the Dandy Warhols come down. They also have released their original intended mix for Welcome to the Monkey House, because that was mixed mainly by Nick Rhodes from Duran Duran, and has a more sort of commercial synth pop kind of sheen to it, which I actually really love that album. So they have 11 records. They've done 7 more since I got off the bus with them. And, a bunch of, there's a rarities compilation, there's live stuff, there's, all that stuff. And I wouldn't say I gave up on them. What happened was, they reacted to Capitol Records and put out a difficult album on purpose named Auditorium. I initially thought, okay, I'm not immediately responding to this. I'm going to have to sit with this album. This is going to be more work than their previous ones. And, then 20 years go by. And I can see why it's challenging for me, especially the previous records were so easy to get into. But watching them on stage, and then especially these sort of spacey Moog synth drenched parts with lots of like noise and stuff, it's like, okay, they got to a point where they wanted to experiment. And my goodness, like, power to this band for hanging together and continuing to stick with their thing and do records that are each a reaction to the record before. They started to label themselves after leaving Capitol. I think they probably were dispensed with their any illusions they might have had at, stardom. So they've just been busy at being artists. And for a band like that, not only to stay together and keep going at the level they're at, but to bring a sense of like being joyful in what they do and with their own work is really, 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 really remarkable. I mean, it would be remarkable if they were huge too. You don't get that very often when you go see a band that's been around for over 30 years. And I felt that came across in spades. I also got to hand it to them. Like, I have a video titled "Why Do Set Lists Suck So Much?" And, I got to hand it to these guys. From the albums they chose from, they didn't always play the obvious songs. Yes, they played We Used to Be Friends. Yes, they played Bohemian Like You. But other than that, they threw some curveballs from all those records, which I thought was really, really cool. But it wasn't like, oh, you want to hear this stuff? Well, fuck you. We're going to make you like twiddle your thumbs for 13 minutes while we do this other thing that's really hard to swallow. No, it was all really palatable, but just, we're also going to, do a bunch of deep cuts as well, just because we like them, is the vibe I got. And there was one moment that I think sums up like the dichotomy, I guess, of what this band is. I guess at one point, Brent DeBoer, or Fathead, as Courtney, who is actually his cousin, calls him, had to step out or maybe go to the bathroom, I don't know. And Zia also followed him off stage, and they kind of broke the fourth wall. Like, you're watching this really gripping rock show, which is changing modes and colors and going into different areas from song to song, but still maintaining this really great energy to it. So then Zia goes up to Courtney and says, Lake Ontario, because, I live in Rochester, which is on Lake Ontario, more or less. And he plays an unaccompanied version of Gordon Lightfoot's the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And at that moment, you could have been in a coffee house watching him. It was very casual, but he fucking took it seriously. Like, he played the song and put his all into it. And then Zia walks back on stage and goes, that was awesome. And it's like, yes. So to have someone in the band register like, whoa, man, that was fucking really, like, you actually put your all into it. Like, you put some heart into that rendition, even though it's like, hey, we're going to the bathroom here for a second, entertain the crowd while we go piss or whatever. That is this band in a nutshell. I can't say enough about this show. My friend Jay walks out and, we're talking in the street and we're like, oh, blah, 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 blah. That feeling when you're buzzed from a show and we didn't have a drop to drink. It was just purely like a musical, experience while the ribs are kind of working to like put us both to sleep. The music is like, it was like mixing like espresso and wine or something. He was like, easily one of the most powerful shows, one of the best shows I've been to in the last 10 years. And I'm like, wow, you've been to a lot of shows. And, I would say it was what you want from live music in so many ways, on so many levels. It was so satisfying. And so as we're walking, Jay asks me, are they the last great rock band? And I know music commentators fucking say things like that all the time. And look, they want to put their stamp on history. I'm averse to those kinds of bold declarations. I think it's kind of silly. I mean, of the millions of bands that have existed, or the thousands of bands that are out there now, can we point to one and say they're the last great rock band? I don't know, but they are one of the bands that is still aspiring to a greatness that might be going out of fashion. I don't know, but let's hope it doesn't. And if it is going out of fashion, then you owe it to yourself to go see them before it does. If they are, in fact, the last great rock band, catch them while you can. Let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear from you. For FeedbackDef, I am Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Thank you for hanging with me. Over and out.